Hi. Well, thanks for being here after lunch. I know it can be slightly painful. My name is Fabrizio. I work at TransferWise in the organic growth team. What we do, basically, we build product platforms and content to drive traffic organically to our site and acquire customers. Just for a bit of context, right? I joined as a one-man band, and in the past 2-3 years, we built 2 CMS, 5 or 6 products. We have roughly a full stack team of like 20 plus people, and scaled across 12 languages, 17 countries, and we built roughly 3 million index pages, which is important from our point of view, and I will explain you why. And now the very kind of mystical question, right? Could you build a CMS that is so beautiful that it looks after your search demand, does keyword research for you, and then makes pages that are amazing, it ranks in Google, and then you don't have to take care of it? Unfortunately, that's not always the answer, right? Most of the time, you start doing SEO on a website, someone like moved to a new platform, and you get that platform out of the box where you try to stick a bunch of ticks on top of it, but unfortunately, you end up with something like that rather than something like this. And that's what we decided to do, like from day one, is rather than trying to retrofit something to what we needed to do, right, to the content that we need to build, to the product that we need to build, we started to build our own. And there's a link here to a presentation that I did a few weeks ago, where I go a little bit more in depth on just the element of building the CMS. But what we try to do is try to build a CMS with features that really help us getting content out faster and doing SEO better. And then what I want to challenge today is like, could we eventually make an automated version of it that it drives by itself and that we don't have to take care about? Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about any AI bullshit, but I just want to explain you how with engineers we ended up in a stage where we went from taking a CMS and actually then killing it. And just to give you some context on our challenge, we are a money transfer company. We wanted to build a price comparison product, and that's what it looks like. There are 1,300 routes, 49 currencies, 71 countries, 43 countries we can send money from. Imagine like in the worst case, 100 competitors that you want to include in this price comparison. That's a lot of pages, right? And then usually what happens is that you're not always in a situation where you need to build a product via a CMS, right? But when I joined TransferWise, this didn't exist, right? And like what the situation that we were in on day one, we were completely blocked. There was one and only page, the home page. It was part of a monolithic application in AngularJS, and changing a footer link on this particular page could have meant tanking a 3 billion a month worth of payment company. So that was very difficult to get in, and the opposite that you could probably imagine, a company like Booking.com is not that people go and build pages if there are more tabs, right? The product itself generates landing pages and has got acquisition built in. So that was our first challenge, and that's why we went down the route of initially building a CMS. And then, like, obviously, this is related to the organizational structure as well, right? Having this type of setup, right, where you have like acquisition built into your product means that most likely there's a product owner, most likely it might not be under marketing, but there could be a product organization where you try to push your SEO changes. And I think that's the pains that usually happens on the average, SEO team. Your pain is to either convince developers somewhere else to do it, or otherwise to convince whoever is in charge of this content that you should make it. Or in our case, we had the lack of starting from scratch with full ownership of this, so I think we were fairly privileged. But regardless of that, what we learned that is really important, because sometimes we still interact with the core product, is we try to build a full stack team, right? If you want this thing to happen, if you really want to push the bar forward, you need to have developers in your team. That's pretty given. Otherwise, you will always gonna continue to moan, and we do a lot of talks here about how this is beautiful. I did a lot of beautiful recommendation, and then suddenly no one implemented it, and things didn't go well. And then, like, just to give you a little bit more context about, in our case, what the growth levers were, I have this quadrant that I always try to bring out when I justify us not doing link building, but the point is that we had no pages, right? So the only solution for us was to stick in the far right corner down there, where we basically need to produce a lot of content pages to satisfy what our customers are searching for, without worrying too much of all the other stuff. Do we have link and blah, blah, blah. And then again, when we started to drive a lot of like growth from scratch, again, we went into what was more measurable, which is like, if you build a page, it's a very black and white thing. The page doesn't exist. You build it, and then there is SEO value to it. All the other stuff, optimizing it, doing all that kind of stuff, we do it, right, the more we scale, but we thought that initially was harder to measure. And then one thing that we learned over time, that's why, that we pretty much justify why we're doing this stuff, and why I'm telling you this stuff, is that our ability to grow and drive traffic. So this is Search Analytics API. There's a count of pages with one click here, and there's a traffic down there. And as you can see, there's quite a correlation. The speed at which we grow is pretty much correlated to our ability to optimize and ship content on our site. Again, if you're in a situation where you already have like a 20 million URL website like Amazon, probably you're a slightly different setup, but I think that the same approach could apply to anyone. You have a lot of fairly large organizations where actually, despite the size, they are stuck in making changes to what they want to implement. And the first thing that we did, that's why we ended up building a CMS, we worked out how to remove dependency, right? We wanted to be in a stage where in 2 minutes, anyone could build a landing page and push it out. Not being tied to any, developer having to commit to any code, as anyone could go and do it. And the way this CMS that we call the answer works is pretty simple. You have like a bunch of widgets that you can select, and this will populate, various components on the pages, and you can go with a bit of creative and stuff, you can publish the page. And what we did as well is we didn't invest too much into the tech of it, right? What you would generally do, you will do this massive big bang launch with, where you need to get JavaScript right, you need to get this right, this other thing right, and then you roll out 25,000 things and you don't know what happened, right? What we did was very simple. We replicated the home page that we couldn't touch, to the point that we just put an iframe down to that AngularJS thing, because there was no value of recoding the thing for the scratch. It's pure text and images, so the actual code behind the platform is very stupid. And what do people do? Can select images. In the case of us building price comparison, our first iteration of price comparison was literally an image, right? Someone designed that table, it was an image, and it was stick on a page. We built a page, we tried to make it rank, and that was our first iteration. And that's what people in the organization can do, can just go and build pages if they think that these are valuable, and our team as well. And then when we were building the CMS, what we learned is that in the worst case, if you already have a platform, you have a bunch of problems, right? Your platform doesn't do well, a bunch of things. If you don't have a platform, you have a bunch of things that you could build. What we learned, even though we had developers in our team, was not to give them a restaurant menu list, so pick and choose, right? There are many things that we decided not to do, or that our tech lead at some point decided that building an automated sitemap was polluting the code, right? Yeah, it's fine. We'll not build a sitemap. We'll make us work harder on internal link, and then we got tired of it. When we reached something like 1 million URL, we started to automatically manually build sitemaps, and then once we do this for already 6 months, we have a stronger case for this guy to actually code it up, and so we don't go in a situation where we build in a feature that we don't really need, because that's the really painful part, and that's why developer end up hating you at some point. Or otherwise, we released a bunch of must-have changes, right? So we were scaling globally. And we had to get ahreflang right to avoid people in the organization building a lot of pages in multiple countries. And that's where we spend a bit of time, differently from other stuff, in figuring out how this feature will work and what is the relationship between the platform and the user, right? In this case, the customer of the platform, our marketing guys, they only use select languages and put a unique identifier to the page, right? I want to build a page around some money to Colombia. And then we have a library in the application that does all the mapping with beautiful ahreflang stuff, to the point that if you build these pages, the whole ahreflang gets concatenated by itself. The user of the platform only need to use 2 variables. The rest is the platform handling it. And this kind of stuff is helpful, right? Similar to this other stuff, we basically build in some monitoring, right? Every one of us, when you don't have access to the code of your website, what you do, you scrape it, right? You get one of these crawler, and you will scrape 1 million of pages every day, month, to know what, right? To know that someone at some point pressed a button in your CMS and it changed something on a database, and something that you could track that without actually having to scrape your site. And this kind of feature that we built helped us going a little bit faster, because we were avoiding people putting no index into a page and us finding out 1 week later and then build a case on how to remove it, or the platform doesn't let you do it or notify you instantly. Or otherwise, we worked on workflow. So obviously you have processes where you do keyword search and build briefs. In the case of pages, you want to track your keywords. We build automation via API with stats, so that the day I press live on this page, we already send the keyword there to track. So no one has to re-upload them, go into a spreadsheet, figure out which pages belong to which keyword, and this stuff helps, right? We went to the point where our operation, right, again, think that we're starting from zero, right? Even though you have an established website, you have a bunch of changes that you want to do over a period of time. Our ability to ship pages and optimize pages and do stuff got better. But there's a problem here, and this, the bit in the middle, right? It's still a function of the people that we had in the team, right? And we went through a process of scaling our content teams to scaling the people that were actually creating pages. But as you can see, you cannot build Booking.com with the people inserting pages into a CMS, right? That's pretty spastic. And the really important bit that we got to is, we realized that our growth was a function of the people that we had in the team, which was really bad, right? Because we didn't want to hire an army. And obviously that being like stuck with a CMS to solve a problem that in theory should be solved by an actual product it will not grow exponentially. We will probably have linear growth, but down to how many people can build how many pages in a given day. But the really important bit that this helped us achieve, and I think that regardless of whether you're building something from scratch or regardless of whether you work in an existing organization where you might have already a product like Booking.com, or and e-commerce is probably a bit more difficult, but in general, like one of this product is that I still very much recommend to have a platform on the side that will help you with some level of feature parity to build the same landing pages that otherwise you wouldn't be able to build fast enough and in the way that you want to do, because there might be other stakeholders in the organization, to get to the point where you make a page rank and you have confidence that this thing works, right? And going through this process helps us to validate in literally a few minutes that building these price comparison pages, these are particular price comparison page that compares us with MoneyGram, it was worth doing, and this is really important. The day that we realized that this stuff was worth doing, I told within our team we figured out that I want 1,000 of these pages, right? Like I don't want to just compare one guy with one currency. I want to cover all the currencies with everyone out there. And what we started to do quite badly, we plugged in a Metabase into our CMS database. We started to get the schema out of the pages, right? Roughly get a template. And then we added this schema and we were literally injecting code into the database at the risk of tanking the entire CMS just to spit out pages faster. And this is not good, right? The same stuff you could do it with API. And what I mean by that is that think about a page on your website. There's like a backend CMS on that that manages it, and then there is, in our case, we have like JSON that explain all the variable and all the component that and all the variable that are in this page. If you understand what the structure is of your JSON, you can manipulate this at scale in a fairly automated fashion. And that's when we started to build an API. And other CMS like WordPress, for instance, and other, they do have an API. We started to build an API to allow us to make changes at scale, right? When we were finding patterns and building new pages and like editing pages and basically doing the changes that we wanted to do. And if you go back to the link that I shared before of my other presentation, I go a little bit more in depth on this. For the sake of this example, I'm just gonna cover this use case, which is basically, I figure out that this page works. How do we make thousands of these pages because of like all the variation of keywords and search intent of customer that we have? So, and that's how we currently scale our MVPs, right? When we have no confidence that we want to build a given product, we don't take engineers, go through a massive project plan and wait 6 months before someone will build a beautiful application. We just launch a bunch of landing pages to validate this. And the way that we do it, imagine we change from money transfer, we want to sell ice cream tomorrow. Imagine that you're selling ice cream and you want to vary it by price, flavors, and the list of allergens. What you would do, you would just build a page, right? So what this means in practice is that you build one page, right? Which is your template. Once you build this, you get the JSON part of it. And trust me, right? There is nothing very technical. And I will explain you why in a bit. The only thing that you need to understand is where your variable sit in this place. In our case, was like the ice cream flavor, and then we have the allergens, and then we have the price, and then in our case, we also include the countries where we sell this ice cream. You can list all your variables in a CSV file, and then once you have these variables in a CSV file, you take Python, and again, the person that started to do this, she's, I think, a brilliant technical SEO, but she didn't know Python like a few months before doing it, so trust me that this is nothing that you couldn't learn in, let's say, 3-4 weeks if a developer help you. So what this Python script does, it goes to find the variable in the template, and then write a rule to replace this variable based on the JSON and based on the CSV that we had there. And then we press a button, we run the script, and suddenly we generate thousands of pages. And again, like, think in the function of us not having a single page. When I joined TransferWise, there was one page. it's very difficult that this page can rank for anything on the web. So this type of approach will really help you, in our opinion, like if you are either in a situation where you need to capture a lot of search demand in a very short amount of time, or otherwise you need to fix a lot of problems in again, faster than what you would generally do. Because again, no matter of you identifying on what the problems are on your side, you still not need to go through a process of like figuring out who is going to fix it and how, right? Versus with this approach, we get to the point where the people who find the problem can instantly roll out changes. And then going to the last part, we do a bit of work at this point, not to think about you building all the JavaScript talk that you may listen to today. At some point, an iframe is an iframe, right? It takes 20 seconds to load, and it's terrible experience for customers. So at this point in time, and every quarter and stuff like that, we do a bit of work in bringing feature parity on the platform, right? And an example of this, imagine your core product. Again, you're working for Booking.com. Imagine your core search product is changing. Every few months you need to keep up with that, or you need to have like a decent feature parity to avoid that the tests that you launch are completely off the day that you eventually then try to scale it. And then what we learned by that is that this is when we were making pages and when we were launching content like manually, and the other bit is when we start using APIs to automate this process. And again, like at some point, imagine you and your competitor got the same content and roughly the same technical setup. It's not that things like ahreflang, there's a more beautiful ahreflang, right? If you get it right, you get it right? So at some point, your competitive advantage, especially when you want to scale really fast, is not necessarily a matter of like having the sexiest thing out there that Google will, love, but it's about the speed at which you can do this, right? I think, especially in my past experience in agency, most of the time that I was, failing was when my client and whoever I was working with was taking 6 months rather than 6 days to implement what he was meant to implement. And this is why we really care about this stuff. And then we got to a point where you can understand that a person running a bunch of AP scripts and an API cannot build Booking.com, right? That's completely madness, right? And that's the point where we pretty much stop, and then that's the point where we already have like a product lookalike, right? In this case, it was an attempt of doing a price comparison product. We have a product lookalike that already gets shit ton of traffic, right? So the argument of whether to build it or not properly is very simple, right? We don't need to make a very big pitch to anyone. And that's how we operate, right? We launch enough of these tests that our core developer pipeline is probably filled for the next year and a half, because we have already a lot of this MVP out. We try to simulate product just by having landing pages that somehow behave like that we already know what we're going to build, but also the day we go and build it is a very simple conversation, because it's already driving a lot of customers to our company, and we don't go through the phase of like, whether this is valuable or not. And that's the stage where we, again, take the same understanding of like what sits behind the page, right? Think about your landing pages on your site, and that's where we understand deeper like what are the variables that are really important to us. In our case, for instance, is combination of currency pairs and stuff like that, and that's when we probably build it properly. And the way these things works is that our developers pretty much work on 3 fronts. On one end is the very core of it, where we have data layers, right? See, this is our availability API, is our price API, is our speed estimation API, is our price comparison API. So this is basically data, right? So the data that populate those variables in the JSON, this is what we continuously build in an API format. And then the second layer is like widgets, front-end widgets, like our calculator for price comparison or a calculator for sending money. And I assume that you might have similar stuff on some of your sites. And then the ultimate layer is the actual front end of it, where you have, like in our case, the CMS, but then in some cases we stop building a CMS and we actually build a product, right? So because we launched enough pages and we have enough traction already on this search demand, it's very simple to think what the product would look like, rather than the other way around, where when I joined before, the first product that we built, we still have it, but it's the only product that no one searched for, right? It avoids you going into the setup that you will build like some product tools or stuff that helps you acquire traffic through search, but actually the day you deploy it, there's no really happy days. And the way these things work is very simple. These are our backend API that feed to our widget on the front end that stick on a product page. And at this point in time, there's no one building any page. There's no one doing pretty much any more keyword research and to build new pages. The only variable comes from our API, right? If tomorrow we have 100 more competitors in our price comparison database, we'll build 1 million more pages. And obviously, keeping an eye on whether these are valuable and unique search intent. And this is what happens when you actually implement that. Rather than building a few hundred pages per month or quarter, we roll out 50, 20,000 pages in a matter of a few months, and this is where the real scaling happening. Obviously, this will mean that at some point you will stop working with people plus a CMS, but your work will be more of a SEO plus designer developers to work on these templates and some of these API, but this is where we really achieve scale. And this is the moment also when we invest in product, right? Recently there has been someone tweeting about Google going into the mortgage calculator space, right? And if you are in a bank, it's probably a big deal, right? And the way in which you can survive to this thing, at least in my view, is first of all, working on delivering a very good product, right? So think about, let's say, Skyscanner. If Skyscanner would have been terrible the day Google rolled out Google Flights, the challenge would have been a little bit tougher. So we spend a lot of time working on the actual product. This has got nothing to do with SEO, right? The traffic, we get it anyway. Google, no matter how Google is sophisticated, rendering JavaScript and everything that they want to render. So now some of these are in React, but still Google doesn't really get whether our tables, it does a good comparison or not. This is not the kind of information that they have, but this is important for the customer, right? The lens there, the data is important for us to be able to have a competitive advantage, because the day that you don't have unique data behind your product is the day that Google can replace this in a second. And the outcome is that you end up with a product that no one has got out there, to the point that not only acquisition is built into the product because you worked out long before in making sure that you have the right landing pages and stuff that convert, but also you have a good product that customers care about. And to summarize, this is roughly how our development cycle look like. This is the stage where there are just humans, and actually guys in my team, and some of them are there. We build pages, right, via CMS. We validate that it's a good idea to build, right, because sometimes you don't really know, and you validate that it's worth covering those search intent, rather than just looking at volume, that sometimes can be a bit funny. You scale them, right? You use API into a CMS, and that's what we invested a lot of time on, so you get to that level of traction. Some of these products, we wait something like, 1 million unique per month to actually build a product, because sometimes we're not really sure about what product to build, but that is the point where we invest engineering resources that, trust me, no matter how much VC funding you never have enough of them. And then you go into the stage where you're not necessarily working with the CMS anymore, but we actually iterate on product. And we don't do this just for our, let's say, a price comparison tool, but we do this for any set of landing pages where there's a common search patterns, where there are common variables. Customer, no matter the country, they always search in the same way to some extent. As long as we extrapolate really the data that sits in the back, it's very easy for us to replicate this pattern in an automated fashion rather than do it manually. And that's pretty much it. I think, if I have to extract the core learning from us doing this for a few years now, the first thing is get a full stack team, right? No matter your setup, hire one engineer at least in your team. Otherwise, most of the time, you'll just be talking about fantasy, but nothing happens in the real world of people, working on website. The second bit is to remove dependency from whoever is blocking you to do stuff. Recently, one of my ex-colleagues joined a company, and the core product is owned by someone else. You cannot touch the website, right? What kind of SEO are you doing, right? That's completely pointless. And then the last bit is that the day, whether you build your own CMS or whether you use something out of the box, there is investment that you could do in this platform to make it actually better for SEO, right? Rather than just using feature out of the box that usually don't do such a great job. And then the last bit is, human don't scale, API do. So try to think at how can you get your data to a place where you can manage it with API and you can deploy it on your side on the front end in a relatively automated fashion. And that's it. There are links to the slide here, and we're always hiring, but that's another story. Thank you.
Thanks, Fabrizio.